Okay, so here we are continuing in chapter 17 with module 60. 59 was about like why the decline in biodiversity is bad. And module 60 is going to be why is this happening? Why do we see a decline worldwide in biodiversity? We know the harm that it can cause. So why is it happening and what can we do about it? It's going to be module 61. So, Module 60 causes of declining biodiversity. We're going to discuss how habitat loss, which is number one, cause of biodiversity decline, how that can lead to declines in species diversity, explain how the movement of exotic species affects biodiversity, describe how overharvesting causes declines in populations and species, understand how pollution reduces populations and biodiversity, and identify how climate change affects species diversity as well. So, habitat loss is the number one cause of declining species diversity, for most species at least. Most habitat loss is due to human development, where we go into an area, we basically change the area. We start living in the area, and we really do change environments way, way more than any other species on Earth. So, species requiring such specialized habitats are particularly prone to population declines. Like if they need a certain area to live, they can't migrate somewhere else. They're obviously, if humans come in and change the habitat, they're going to go extinct. And a species may decline in abundance or become extinct even without complete habitat destruction. So even though their habitat's just altered a little bit, it may cause that species to decline. It may not just be the total destruction of the habitat. You see habitat loss throughout the world. Some regions of the world have experienced large declines in the amount of forested land from 1980 to 2000, while other regions have shown little change or have seen increases in forest cover. I'd like to see a little bit more updated graph of this. Maybe I'll try to find one by the time we do our review. But you can see here, obviously, the Amazon rainforest is where we see a decrease in forest cover. We've had major restoration efforts in the United States. We did have really bad. We would be red 50 years ago. But you can see we definitely have restoration going on here. No change in forest cover up in Russia in some areas, but in some areas it's definitely being exploited. So those red areas are the areas of most concern in terms of habitat loss. And it just so happens that a lot of them, like especially in Brazil, are going to be the places where you have the most biodiversity. And so that's huge because that's going to cause a major decline in that. In marine systems, there's been a sharp decline in the amount of living coral in the Caribbean Sea. So if you look from 1977 to 2012, you can see that the amount of living coral has declined. And coral reefs are the world's most biodiverse aquatic ecosystems. So it seems like a lot of the places that have the most biodiversity are a lot of the places we exploit. We will, in terms of coral reefs, we'll go in and we will dredge them up. We'll put hotels up and make cities around these areas because of the natural beauty that's there, because they become tourist destinations, and that in turn can cause major coral bleaching, a lot of runoff to go into the water, and those corals to die. So exotic species, not just habitat loss, but also the movement of exotic species when it comes to plants and animals moving around the world can cause biodiversity decline because people end up harvesting them from their natural areas and move them into areas where they don't thrive and end up dying. So during the past several centuries, humans have frequently moved animals, plants, and pathogens, usually not pathogens, is not with a purpose. But native species, just so you know, are species that live in their historical range, typically where they have lived for thousands or millions of years. Exotic species are going to be a species living outside its historical range, also known as an alien species. And an invasive species is a species that spreads rapidly across large areas. Around the world, invasive and exotic species pose a serious threat to biodiversity, by acting as predators, pathogens, or superior competitors to native species. So sometimes when an exotic species moves in somewhere else, whether it be on purpose or not, that exotic species can take over, and that's when it becomes invasive. Overharvesting can cause declines in populations and species. So when we go out and we overhunt or we overfish an area, other forms of harvesting are the most direct human influences on wild populations of plants and animals. Most species can be harvested, whether it be plant or animal, to some degree, but a species is overharvested when people remove them at a rate faster than the population can replace them. And the extreme overharvesting of a species can cause extinction. We've seen this with large fish in the Keys, in the Florida Keys. Like I think I've mentioned in class, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, people would go on deep sea expeditions out of the Keys and they'd come back with ginormous fish that were taller than them. And people hardly come back with those anymore because pretty much they're gone. They've been overfished, they've been overharvested. So we need to make sure that regulations are in place, which a lot of them are now, to only have a certain amount of catch or a certain amount of animals that are able to be hunted or certain plants that are able to be harvested. All right, so the legal and illegal trade in plants and animals represents a serious threat to their ability of some species to persist in nature. So the national and international laws help protect species. The Lacey Act is a U.S. act that prohibits interstate shipping of all illegally harvested plants and animals. So basically, if you get caught under the Lacey Act trading exotic plants or animals, you can actually get in lots of trouble. I'm sure some of you have seen that Tiger King show. That's what that guy got really busted on, was the Lacey Act. So he, illegal breeding and selling of exotic animals that shouldn't be happening because they're not in their native habitat. Now, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, or the CITES, is a 1973 treaty formed to control the international trade of threatened plants and animals worldwide. So worldwide, we just, it's not just within one country, but worldwide this is an issue. And so that's an international agreement, and so you're not allowed to do this internationally. Of course, it's hard to regulate internationally. And the red list is going to be a list of worldwide threatened species. So those would be like, if an animal or a plant is on the red list, that means it's in big time trouble in terms of its viability, and it might come extinct. Pollution can also have harmful effects on species. So threats to biodiversity come from toxic contaminants such as pesticides, heavy metals, acids, and oil spills. So wherever industry is set up, it may have an effect on the biodiversity in the area because of the pollutants that are around. So other contaminants such as endocrine disruptors can have non-lethal effects and inhibit reproduction. Basically, this is going to be if there is something that is going to go in and affect reproduction, maybe not kill the animals themselves, but affect their reproduction, that can cause major biodiversity decline as well. Pollution sources that cause declines in biodiversity also include nutrients, like we've talked about before, which cause eutrophication in algal blooms and dead zones. Also, thermal pollution that can make water bodies too warm for species to survive. This happens a lot by power plants. Power plants, what they do is they take in water, they generate electricity by turning that water into steam, and then they dump that warm water, back into water that was once cooler. This causes major temperature changes and can totally change the ecosystem. Climate change also has the potential to affect species diversity. So if climate change affects patterns of temperature and precipitation in different regions of the world, biodiversity is going to be threatened. For example, in some regions, species may be able to respond to warming temperatures and changes in precipitation by migrating to a place where the climate is well suited to the species. In other cases, that's not possible, and the animals will just die out. And that's it for Module 60. We'll talk a little bit more in Module 61 about things, and that's it for now.